So good morning to all my friends on the West Coast, and good afternoon to all of you on the East Coast. Thank you to everyone who took time out of your Saturday to be here with us. I really miss seeing some of you, those of you that I know in person, but it is kind of nice to attend an event from your sofa. I bet some of you can relate, or in my case, your home office. And thank you to Miles for Migraine for inviting me to speak today. As Helen mentioned, my name is Angie Glaser, and I am a chronic migraine warrior, a patient advocate, a writer, a blogger, and the senior editor for migraineagain.com, which is the largest migraine patient website run by patients for patients. I have always been a writer. I've been keeping a journal ever since I was 6 years old. And I was gifted my first composition notebook. Like many of you here today, I am a reluctant chronic migraine warrior, but I am a proud migraine patient advocate. So let's get started with a brief agenda. You will have the opportunity to participate in a short poll. Then I will tell you a little bit more about my experience with migraine and how I got started with advocacy. And then we'll finish with some resources. And as Helen mentioned, we'll have an opportunity to ask and answer some questions. So if you think of any questions as I'm speaking, go ahead and drop them into that chat box, and then we'll come back to them at the end. So why advocate? All of us here today come from very different walks of life. We all have a unique experience, but living with migraine or another disabling headache disorder, or living with somebody, being a caregiver to somebody who lives with migraine or a disabling headache disorder, there are certain experiences that we may have in common. I suspect we have in common. So I'd like to take a moment to see if any of you have been in this situation. This is totally voluntary, so if you would rather sit back and relax, that's fine. But if you would like to answer this one question, have you ever felt misunderstood, dismissed, or frustrated by a headache provider who did not, or a healthcare provider who did not understand migraine? To participate in this poll, you can either text Angie Glaser 620 to 22333, or you can go to this URL up here at the top, pollev.com/Angie Glaser 620. Give a couple minutes for our responses to come through. So far, looking very good. So as I mentioned, and as you probably already know, people with migraine come from all walks of life. We're male, we're female, old, young, Black, white, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous. Migraine itself does not discriminate, but people, organizations, and institutions do discriminate. They discriminate against women. They discriminate against Black and Indigenous people of color, and they discriminate against people who identify as LGBTQ. And of course, they discriminate against migraine and the people who live with migraine. To paraphrase Dr. Robert Shapiro, who is a headache specialist and one of the leading voices on migraine advocacy, discrimination against people with disabling headache disorders limits the full expression of our lives. I have certainly found that to be true, and that I was not able to express myself as fully as I would like to because I was met with discrimination or social stigma. And I imagine many of you can also relate. So let's check back in at this poll. Thank you so much to those who participated. This is not what I love to see, but it is not surprising. It seems like the majority of us, 7 out of 10 of us here, have been in a situation where we felt unsupported by our healthcare providers. And of course, we rely on our healthcare providers to walk us through this journey and to hold our hands and to really be a partner. And when you don't have a healthcare provider who is your partner, it can cause a lot of extra pain and suffering, as you see, as you all know, or many of you know. Wow, that is 2/3 majority, it looks like, has more than once been in this position. So I'm going to move on from this poll. Thank you once again for participating. That was my first time trying that. I'm glad that it worked. So my migraine story. I have been living with the burden of an invisible illness since I was born. I was diagnosed with migraine at age 3 after a bad bout of the chicken pox triggered a series of pretty classic, as they call them, migraine attacks with intense head pain, photophobia, and vomiting. And my pediatrician diagnosed me. And in children, migraine frequently looks like stomach issues, like vomiting, nausea, upset stomach. Even so, when my stomach issues started showing up around age 9, my pediatrician didn't recognize it as migraine, even though I had a diagnosis of migraine, and labeled it as anxiety and sent me to a psychiatrist. And I only began getting regular care from a neurologist after I began menstruating in middle school, which was the hormonal trigger for me that triggered my multi-day disabling attacks. And even though I had access to a neurologist, my neurologist gave me very little education about my disease and nearly no suggestions on how to manage my disease. So I learned to cope throughout middle school, high school, college, and eventually in the workplace by hiding my migraine attacks the best that I could. And this worked really well when I was only getting 3 to 5 attacks per year, but eventually my attacks became too frequent and too disabling to hide. When I was 24 years old, I just started a new job as a Yosemite Park Ranger, actually, and I woke up one morning with a migraine aura. That attack signaled the start of my new life with daily migraine symptoms. Over the next 5+ years, I woke up each day with a migraine attack and went to sleep each night with the migraine attack. I ended up leaving my job, moving back in with my parents. I eventually applied for and was rewarded Social Security disability insurance. And this was the catalyst that got me to a headache specialist. I had a 6 or maybe 9-month wait. I had the migraine symptoms every day that whole time. Finally saw a headache specialist, and for the first time somebody really explained to me what was happening in my brain, and explained migraine as something that wasn't just this thing that popped up every once in a while. It was something that's in my genes. That's something that's my brain kind of has the capacity to go into at any moment. And that was really the first time that I felt empowered to take control and to really had clear direction on how I could manage this thing that had been a part of my life for so long. And then this last mark here, finally, just this last year, I experienced a break in my daily head pain, and I still experience chronic migraine, but I have beautiful stretches of pain freedom that are literally a dream come true. So as I mentioned, my attacks became chronic when I was 24. And here's what I imagined my 20s would look like. I would be starting a new career, finding purpose, celebrating, traveling, doing all of the normal things that somebody in their 20s would do. And here's what my 20s actually looked like once migraine became something that I really had to deal with. And I put grief here in bold because the grieving process is long and important, and it's not something that we talk about all the time. I had to grieve a lot. And an important part of this grieving process is anger. I was so angry at my body for not cooperating with me. And I was angry that I had little social support from friends and coworkers. And I was angry that I had been living this for so long, and the best solution I'd come up with up to that point was to just hide it. And by hiding it, it had created all of these feelings of shame around migraine. It was something that I didn't feel like I could really talk about. And of course, you all know that migraine is not something that we should be ashamed of. We did not choose it. No one would choose this. We are born with it in most cases. And I'm willing to bet that most of you have also felt shame or embarrassment. And I'm willing to bet that most of you have also at one point felt some anger about your experiences with advocacy. Anger is the fuel for advocacy, in my case, at least. I want to share a quote by a poet, Jericho Brown. He's a Black gay man whose latest book just won the Pulitzer Prize. In a recent interview, he said, "I figured out that in order for me to exude any kind of self-love and to have any kind of pride, I would first have to figure out what things about myself I had been told I was supposed to be ashamed of. And I'd have to reclaim those things and find ways to be proud of them." This quote really speaks to the power of advocacy and owning your own story. Speaking up about your migraine experience is a way to reclaim this thing that we have been told, for some of us our whole lives, that we should hide and that we should be ashamed of, and find ways that we can be proud of it. So here's a little timeline of how I became an advocate. As I mentioned, I've been a writer my whole life, so writing seems like a really natural fit for me. I was in my 20s, I felt very isolated. I didn't know many people in real life who had been through the things that I was dealing with. So from my bed, my parents' house, I did some Googling and learned how to create a blog and a Twitter account. And once I started sharing my experiences, the feedback was just overwhelming. I met with so many people, young people and parents of young people who were in the same position that I was in. And that gave me a lot of validation and a lot of community. And it was really reassuring that this thing that felt really lonely is actually something that so many other people are experiencing. And as I mentioned before, the fuel that kind of drove me into advocacy was this loneliness that I was experiencing and the anger that was part of that natural grieving process that comes with having to kind of rearrange your life. Shortly after I started my blog, Paula Dumas, who's the co-founder of Migraine Again, reached out to me on Facebook, I believe. I'd written an article about Social Security disability. I started working part-time for them as an editor 3 years ago, and I became full-time this year in February, which is a huge accomplishment, something that I'm proud of. I was able to get off of disability. And through my work at Migraine Again, I was connected to CHAMP, the Coalition for Headache and Migraine Patients, which is a coalition of a bunch of different organizations in this space who are all working towards the same goals. And that really helped me break into the advocacy world. Through CHAMP, I connected with Katie McDonald for the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy. That's the group that leads Headache on the Hill each year in February, where we go to DC and lobby our legislators. And I've spoken at Miles for Migraine events and on the Migraine World Summit. And I've given testimony at some public meetings, an ICER meeting in Chicago in January, right before we all stopped traveling, and also on Capitol Hill. So advocacy helped me reclaim some of those things that it felt like migraine had taken away from me. I had found a community, I found friends, I found purpose, I was able to travel. I was able to do all of these things that felt like huge losses for me. And I view advocacy as a way of kind of showing up and fighting for my younger self, and also fighting for those who do not have the resources and the privilege that I have. It's a way of fighting for those who have never been told that migraine is not their fault, or those who live in states where they only have one headache specialist. And just to caption these photos, you see Miles for Migraine at the bottom, and Retreat Migraine in the middle, and then Headache on the Hill, of course, and some cheersing with Champ in the corner. So that is what advocacy has looked like for me, just as all of our migraine experiences are completely different, or different enough. How advocacy fits with us and where we are is also going to be different. And there are many different flavors of advocacy. Advocacy can be very simple, but that doesn't mean that it's easy, because kind of baked into the concept of advocacy is vulnerability and risk. So simple, but not easy. Advocacy at its core is sharing your experiences with migraine. Because we have been told so many times that this is something that we have to hide or that we should hide, anytime that you don't hide it, you are taking an active step. You are advocating for yourself, but also for all of us. So speaking up is hugely, hugely important. And that can happen online at events like this, on social media. I found a huge, beautiful, connected community on social media when I first jumped into this space. That really helped me, really kind of gave me more fuel to keep going. And also talking to the people in your life, those private conversations. And most importantly, just resisting the urge to hide. And then advocacy, of course, can be a little bigger, lobbying for change on the kind of a macro level by talking to those people in power. So Headache on the Hill is a beautiful example of that. And while Headache on the Hill is an in-person event, they frequently also sometimes, I should say, have steps that you can take, kind of virtual advocacy events. And then migraine at work, talking to your boss about your experience is another way to advocate. And as I kind of touched on a little bit, it does take privilege to advocate. It isn't easy. When I look at my own experiences with migraine beginning at age 3, I see many pain points or opportunities for something to be better. From the way my neurologist talked to me, to the medications that were and were not available, and to the insurance hassles, and to dealing with my manager once I made it into the workforce. And I am a white person who comes from privilege. I have parents who had resources to be my safety net and to get me access to really high quality healthcare. Now that just makes me think about how many people don't have these resources, or who are living with migraine and encountering these same barriers, these same issues that I encountered, but then they also have to deal with an extra burden, an extra hassle of racism or sexism or homophobia. So not every type of advocacy will be a fit for every person. Advocacy usually requires energy, time, knowledge, and a lot of heart. And sometimes it requires connections or money, skills, the ability to travel, and an understanding workplace. Because migraine is so stigmatized, the general population doesn't really see it as something that's worth respecting. To be in a position where you feel comfortable speaking publicly about it is a privilege, and not everybody is in that position. Many people don't speak up about their experiences with migraine because they're afraid to lose their jobs, and their insurance for a lot of people is tied to their jobs. So the real downside of living with this disease is that there can be a huge economic toll, sometimes a huge toll, to speaking up. The advocacy tent, though, is big, and the community is really welcoming, that there is space for you and your skills, whatever they may be. And it might take a little bit of trial and error to figure out the organization or the channel or the flavor of advocacy that you want to work in. But us migraine warriors are used to a little trial and error. And of course, depending on where you are in the grieving process or with your physical health, which both can change all the time, you might find that not all forms of advocacy are always accessible to you. If you're too ill to travel or you're feeling emotionally too vulnerable to be public about your experiences, then maybe how you advocate will change over time. And that's completely okay. I see advocacy just like migraine. It's something, we're in it for the long haul. So there's a lot of change and a lot of variation that can come with it. The important thing is that we keep fighting and that we keep showing up and getting back on the horse, so to speak. No matter which flavor of advocacy is right for you, the rewards are many. Not only are you actively helping to remove some of this burden that we all deal with, having a disease that is invisible and discriminated against, but you are rising above the loneliness that comes with migraine. And you're tapping into this big, beautiful community that we are all building together. I kind of see advocacy like a machine that turns anger and rage into community, purpose, and connection. It is a lifeline and a light in the dark for people with migraine who spend a lot of time in the dark. Advocacy is incredibly empowering. It can be scary, but most of all, it is freeing. Every one of us deserves to live with the freedom of knowing that our experiences are respected, that our disease is respected, and that we are respected. And I really see that as the heart of advocacy and why we advocate. It does take courage to advocate, but it is the kind of courage I think that makes you stronger. In the words of Audre Lorde, you become strong by doing the things you need to be strong for. I've certainly found that with advocacy. I did not think I could do some of the things that I ended up doing. And honestly, we as a community need to be strong for each other and for those who come after us and for our younger selves who had to live with this burden. Migraine may be a lonely disease, but migraine advocacy is full of encouragement and community, and most importantly, hope. So if you're ready to get started with advocacy or are looking for ways to continue with your migraine advocacy, here are a few resources that can help you get started. Please disregard the typo there in CHAMP. The first one here, the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy, or AHDA. I mentioned earlier, this is the big lobbying group that is responsible for Headache on the Hill each year. And CHAMP, Coalition for Headache and Migraine Patients, as I also mentioned earlier, they're great. This site, their site, headachemigraine.org, is a great kind of umbrella site for all things advocacy. And in addition to the kind of big global advocacy stuff, they also have great resources to help you advocate for yourself, like with financial aid guides to getting access to medication. The Migraine World Summit is a great resource for education to learn more about migraine. Migraine at Work, this is a new initiative aimed at reducing barriers and stigma in the workplace. There's a section that's empowering for employees, helping employees advocate for what they need in the workforce. And there's also a section for employers so that employers can be educated. And lastly, you have an opportunity to share your migraine journey. If you would like to tell your story but are not sure the channel to do it, but you think that there's something in your migraine journey that other people will connect to and find valuable, which I would say is true for every single one of you. This migraine journey page at Migraine Again is a template that we've created that asks you a series of questions, and then we'll take your answers to that questions and package them into a journey that'll be published online. And you can see I included the website here where you can share your migraine journey, and you can also find dozens of migraine journeys that we've published on migraineagain.com also. And finally, if you'd like to connect with me after this further, my personal blog is chronicmigrainelife.com, and I am on Twitter and Instagram. And as I mentioned, Migraine Again, I'm highly involved in their work, so a lot of my work can be found on Migraine Again. And I'm biased, but I think Migraine Again is a great resource for education and connecting with other people. So
Angie.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. I just wanted to jump in here because you're giving some great resources. And if people didn't take an individual picture of those slides, I just want to make a mention that the slides will be hosted on our website so that people are able to refer and pull the information from the actual slides once we get it logged on our website. So I don't want people to be worried that they're missing something.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think that was a very valuable presentation. There was so much good information. I just made a couple of notes. Your slide, I know we talked to a lot of people who say that I loved your slide about the flavor of advocacy, because some people hear the word advocacy and they're like, I can't wrap my head around that, because it's too lofty of a word. And I think when you put it in perspective, that it comes in many flavors and that it can change over a person's time frame, how you get started can make an impact. You mentioned that you were a journaler, so quite naturally you turned to writing when you were ready to really stand up and advocate. I think it was so powerful when you talked about advocacy giving you pride and power and a purpose and being freeing. I think that's another really great takeaway. There's so many valuable takeaways from this presentation. So we're really grateful to have you share your thoughts, because your thoughts are powerful. And I know a lot of people probably haven't been able to express it. And you've put it into words. I'm talking about advocacy being a fuel. So to that end, I do have some questions that have come in for you. And one of them that came in says, for someone that has not started advocating yet for themselves because they don't think people would understand their invisible disease, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that there's a 100% chance that someone will understand your disease. And I know that because there are so many people who are also living with your disease. So I would recommend connecting with other people who have it, getting to a place where you can see and feel that there are other people who understand. Facebook private support groups, that was actually my first baby step into this world, was realizing how many other people on Facebook in these support groups were living with the same thing that you're living with. So I would focus on connecting with the people who are living with migraine and getting to a good place where you feel like you're kind of accepted in the broader public, or the broader world, I'd say, then trying to start maybe with your boss or somebody that might be a trickier conversation.
Okay, great, good advice. Another one of our attendees mentions, when I advocate for myself, I just want others to understand what migraine is and not feel sorry for me. Do you have suggestions and ways to talk about migraine with others who don't have migraine so that they don't feel sorry for us, rather they can help us and join us in our advocacy?
Yes, so that's a little bit of a tricky question. When somebody is feeling sorry for you, you gotta. My first thought is they're empathizing with you, so that's a win. that's a little window right there. That's showing that they're hearing what you're going through and they're putting themselves in your shoes. So I would say this next step of that would be to kind of flip it. Yes, this is terrible. Yes, I don't like living with this, but I know these three things are going to make living with it so much easier for me. And one of those is greater understanding. So just you saying that you understand is really helpful for me. Another thing is more NIH funding maybe, or your boss accepting, whatever it is. I would try to continue the conversation once you get to a point where they're empathizing with you, then kind of dig in deeper into some of these different spots that are a little more forward looking. One thing that I love about advocacy is I feel like it takes the focus off of you and your experience. So you could say, another example or way to do this is say, yes, it's terrible. I don't like living with this, but it has connected me to a bigger world. It has opened my eyes to how many people actually live with something invisible like this. And it's not just something that I'm experiencing, it's something that a lot of us are experiencing.
Great. I think that's great advice for that attendee. And we received another question regarding, you spoke about grief. Can you give us some guidance on walking through the grieving process to come out the other side?
Yes, so two resources that were hugely helpful for me personally in the grieving process. The first was learning to meditate, learning mindfulness, which was very hard to do when I already had chronic migraine. I'm sure some of you have been in this situation. Once I kind of learned it though and got to a point where I was comfortable with it, it really helped me look at some of these emotions. And the second thing that I found really valuable is working with a therapist, a cognitive behavioral therapist, specifically in my case. And it is really tricky though, because our disease is invisible and most people don't know that much about it. It may take some finding the right person who can walk you through it. If you have a therapist who you have to explain every aspect of migraine to them, that may not be the best fit. But I think that if you have access to a mental health professional, I think because the grief can be so big and there isn't like a natural end to it, because it's something we live with always. I think working with somebody who can help you get those skills, help you get perspective, can be really helpful. And community. I mentioned the support groups a little bit. I think connecting, whether it's one person, whether it's a group of people, having even just one person in your life who understands migraine at an intimate level because they deal with it on their own, I think that can be really helpful to kind of have a shoulder to cry on, so to speak. But it's not easy. I do want to say that the grieving process it's important, and we inevitably don't feel our best while we're going through it because we're grappling with a lot of emotions. So I think that's somewhere where if you can find help from friends, family, mental health professional, that's really where you need to kind of all hands on deck, bring everybody in to help you get through that. And periodically when it comes up again, because it will. You don't get to put a bow on it and then it's done. it keeps going.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good step-by-step sort of process into how to start working through that process. Just a couple things you mentioned regarding mindfulness is we are hosting a mindfulness series the month of August. We will probably extend. It's on Tuesdays and Thursdays. evenings where we've been offering various mindfulness, whether it's meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, art therapy, to have some people dip their foot in the water if they haven't tried a mindfulness series. They can do it through Miles for Migraine. I also put a link there. As I mentioned, we have conversations, support community groups 6 days a week, including one for teens. I put the link on there if people wanted to hop on and perhaps take one that's convenient for them and see what the support group is all about, in addition to the resources you mentioned. So it's really a lot of powerful thoughts. Angie, we could stay with you all day, I'm sure. We just have so many people interested in wanting to hear your words of wisdom, but unfortunately we have to move on.